Britain might finally have a yacht which is capable of winning the America's Cup. If INEOS's centre of gravity is further forward than any other team, and their crew weight is further forward than any other team, and their foils are further back than any other team, then this means they might not be relying on the rudder for any lift at all. In fact, they might be using the rudder to actually pull down on the back of the boat. And if they're using the rudder to pull down, then the rudder becomes a positive for a righting moment as it's offset to windward of the main lifting foil. And if their rudder is moved forward, so it's got less leverage over the pivot point for the pitch, then it's going to have to pull down even harder, giving the yacht even more righting moment. Now, this is an initial reaction video, but if any of that is true, then Britain might finally have a yacht which is capable of winning the America's Cup. I'll be honest with you, the initial reveal of INEOS was pretty underwhelming in kind of every respect. First of all, in terms of what we could see, well, we couldn't see much. We didn't get any shots with a decent vantage point down into the yacht because you've not put it in the water. We can't see the pods, the layout, can't see the deck, the mast foot, the foils are shrouded, and the rudder isn't even mounted on the boat. So what don't I like about this boat? Well, it's got this really thick, meaty, voluminous bustle at the front of the boat, which just collides like a cut and shut job with the maximum beam where the foil camp pods are. Then as you go further back in the boat, it morphs into this huge skeg with a massive wetted area, which must be horrendous to drag around. Then that skeg ends well before the rudder, meaning that all the rudder mechanics they've had to put above deck. If we've looked at Emirates Team New Zealand and Lingy and how they've managed to hide a lot of that rudder structure within the bustle at the back of the boat and clean up the aft sections, INEOS have certainly not managed that. And of all the teams, their pods look the most well formed furthest aft, but there's no backstays to support back there. So why haven't they removed some of that slab-sidedness to the boat in the same way that Team New Zealand have with their sculpted back, or even a Lingy cutting the pods down short? You can also see that they haven't got much of a trench deck. The mast has got no mast extension, so the deck must be pretty thick, a big wedge of material around the foil arms just in front where the mast is. It seems to diverge from the other boats in so many ways that initially I just can't think it's fast, and the whole design looks really brutalist. But maybe there are some excuses for some of those features. What if the volume in the bustle at the front and the lack of volume in that thin skeg at the back means the boat floats relatively bow up, giving you a greater angle of attack on your foils to lift out of the water when you're in displacement mode, but then enables you to fly bow down aggressively with that huge skeg, creating the end plating for when you're up and flying. And all that structure at the back of the boat that they've put on because it's so thin, you know, the thicker pods and the huge container for the rudder gantry. Well, I guess in many ways that can be excused because whilst the airflow crossing the deck, you wouldn't want it to meet any slab sides as it hits the entry to the sails. At the back of the boat where the wind is exiting the sails, it should be pretty much aligned with the centre line of the boat at that point anyway, especially in these high apparent wind boats. And their pods and the big housing for the rudder gantry are all aligned to the centre line anyway. So maybe they're not as big a hindrance as one might imagine. And as we go on to suggest, maybe having a really sturdy control over that rudder and loading the rudder with lots of downforce is a key part of the design of this boat. I know I'm going to get comments in this saying that I must be an INEOS fanboy, kind of making up excuses for some pretty out there design, but I'm just trying to understand the process that the INEOS design team have gone through and the rationale for something that's so strikingly different from the other boats. The key thing that's really playing on my mind is the placement of the rudder. The rudder looks well forward of the back of the boat, and this is different to the other teams. All the other teams seem to put the rudder pretty much as far back as possible. You're not allowed any rudder beyond the transom of the boat sticking out behind it, so they seem to put it just enough forward that when it's raked all the way back, it should still be in front of that transom. And you want your rudder as far back because it's got the most leverage the further back you have it to control those pitching moments. That means you don't have to have as much force on the rudder because it's got a greater leverage over the kind of pitch poling tendency of the boat. And that's a good thing because the less load you have on the rudder, the less drag you have on the rudder and the easier it is to control, so you need less structure above deck to control it. INEOS's rudder is further forward and they seem to have a lot more structure to control it. But how might this affect the overall yacht? What would this give them? Why would they do this? Why would they break with convention? Well, as I said in the first part of the video, if INEOS have moved all their crew weight as far forward as possible, and there is evidence for this, we can only see 3 crew pods, so supposedly the 4th crew pod is inboard and further forward, moving their whole crew weight further forward than the other teams. And if their lifting surfaces on the main foils are as far back or further back than every team, and they've pushed the centre of weight for the boat as far forward in the rule, maybe they're at a tipping point where when the boat is in flight, the rudder is no longer lifting the transom, but actually holding the transom down, stopping the boat from tripping over and falling forward. What would this mean? Well, because the rudder is offset to windward, anything you can do to minimise the amount of lift it's doing basically gives you extra righting moment. And we've seen this with the other teams who have moved their lifting surfaces further back and moved their crew further forward. But if you can push this further and further to the extent where your rudder is actually having to pull down on the back of the boat, then the rudder is actually giving you extra righting moment when it's pulling down and stopping you from pitching forward. By moving the rudder still further forward, you are reducing the moment that the rudder has on those pitching forces, meaning it has to work even harder to stop the boat pitching forward. That means more downforce, more righting moment, and more sail carrying power for the boat. And maybe that is the reason why we've seen INEOS move their rudder forward, and maybe the high loads on it is why we've seen the bulkier, sturdier controls for the bearing top surface. And when we look at the design of the LEQ-12, it tallies up there as well. Remember, they broke 2 rudders under extreme testing loads. And when we look at that boat and scale it not by its length, but by the sail area, we can see that the rudder to mainfoil gap is actually comparatively short. So it seems like they could have been testing on their LEQ-12 this kind of short wheelbase, powerful boat all the time along. Another theory is there is a minimum area for these foils, kind of like a safety clause that stops them from making rudders which are too small. Obviously, the smaller rudder you have, the faster you'll go because you have less drag, but it does risk the rudder letting go and pitch poling. So they've got a minimum surface area of the rudder of 0.3 meters. But in testing, we saw them add on a kind of a duck's tail to their rudder. Now, I thought this was either some sort of sensor or a weight to induce resonance so they could do tests on rudder vibrations. However, what if it wasn't just a counterweight? What if that was to satisfy the minimum area rule, but do it by adding area behind the foil in the wake of the foil, where it's not adding to the frontal area or the span of that rudder, therefore still reducing the drag from it? If you add that duck's tail on, then to meet the rule where the rudder's got to be in front of the transom, then that means moving the whole rudder forward. Maybe this is a separate theory, maybe it works in conjunction with the idea about using the rudder for downforce and righting moment. Now, this is all speculation. I would have loved to wait until INEOS launched, but then it wouldn't be initial reaction video, and maybe a bit of out there speculation about the INEOS boat is what the world needs right now. We've got other boats which will be launching soon, still waiting for Orient Express and American Magic, and I don't want to wait around on giving you my opinions on INEOS and miss out on their launches. I'm really excited to see this boat launch and see how many of my theories are actually true or there's any more evidence for. Either way, I think we can say INEOS through this cup right up to the present day have really gone against the grain. And for me, that is the interest of the America's Cup, seeing different design philosophies go up against each other, especially when one design philosophy is maybe at a juxtaposition to the consensus. And, you know, that excites me about the racing we're going to see this summer. Thanks again for watching the video. Please check out the sponsors, Crafting Shore and Alan. And yeah, think about subscribing for more AC content. Cheers, see you around.